That door wasn't supposed to be unlocked. It was still light outside, maybe 4 in the afternoon. I'd come home early with a stuffed-up nose and a scratchy throat, thinking I'd take some medicine and crash on the couch. My head felt heavy. Didn't want to be around anyone, just needed a bit of rest. Right away, I noticed the door was open a crack, enough to let in a slice of that sharp daylight. No welcome mat inside, no sound of the TV. I thought maybe she stepped out to grab groceries. But my gut felt off. The house didn't smell like dinner or candles or anything. It smelled stale, like nobody expected me. Something was wrong, or maybe it was just me. I started coughing and had to pause by the doorway, pressing the back of my hand to my mouth. That's when I heard it, this dull scrape, like furniture being moved across the floor. I took a few steps in, as quiet as I could with my shoes still on. The light in the hallway was off, so I flicked it on. Nothing unusual at first glance. The living room was in its usual state, a couple of magazines tossed on the coffee table, an empty mug on the side table. Then another sound. Something shorter, maybe a gasp or a moan, came from the bedroom. I remember thinking, you're imagining things because you feel lousy. But no, it was real. I heard it again, her voice, ragged, breathy, and not the kind of sound she made by herself. I don't know why I kept going forward. A normal person might freeze, or call out, or do something else. But I just walked. Slow steps, my nostrils burning from the cold and from something else, some kind of panic creeping up my spine. I got closer to the bedroom, heard a clumsy thump against the wall. Her voice again, cut short. One more step, and then I saw them. Tom Warren, my boss, had his back to the door. He was leaning over her. My wife, on her knees. His white dress shirt was hanging off the chair near the bed. Her hair was a mess. His hands were on her head, and the expression on his face. I don't think I'll ever forget it. Not the details. Not how he turned, slowly, and locked eyes with me. I expected him to jump or run, but he didn't. He just stared. Like I was a stray dog coming in from the rain, something to be handled or tossed out. She twisted around and saw me, her eyes wide. She looked guilty for 1 second, then she looked afraid. And I felt everything inside me drop. Maybe I was supposed to lose it, start yelling, throw punches. But I only stood there, breathing through my mouth because my nose was clogged. Tom finally spoke. He said, "Close the door if you're staying," in this calm voice. So calm it made me numb. I closed the door. I'm not even sure why I did that. Maybe it was some reflex, or maybe I wanted privacy to do what came next. I glanced around the room. I'd never noticed how cramped it felt. Like the walls were closing in. I saw the top of the wardrobe, where I kept a golf club my son gave me last Father's Day, a half-joke gift because I'd said I wanted to try golf. I reached up and grabbed it. My wife gasped. Tom raised his eyebrows, but he didn't back away. Didn't even bother picking up his shirt. I didn't swing for him. I turned and saw the dresser near the mirror. I saw his watch lying there, one of those fancy chronographs, the kind that cost more than I'd make in 2 paychecks. Without thinking twice, I took a full swing at it. The watch shattered against the wall, fragments flying. It made a tinkling sound like broken glass dancing on the hardwood. For a split second, nobody breathed. I saw the mirror in front of me, saw my own reflection. I didn't recognize my face. My eyes had this emptiness. Before my mind could catch up, I swung at the mirror too. The crack was deafening, a burst of silver shards hitting the floor. My wife let out a scream. Tom took a step back. He finally looked scared, like maybe he realized he'd misjudged me. I could feel my heart slamming in my chest, my throat so tight I could barely swallow. I didn't speak for a long second, just stared at them. Then I said, "Don't wait for me on Monday, Tom." That was it. I turned around and walked out. Didn't even take my coat from the closet. I heard my wife call my name, but it sounded far away, like we were in different worlds now. I left the house, got into my truck, and drove without thinking. Stopped at a parking lot near a strip mall, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and tried to breathe. My hands were shaking. My nose was running. The adrenaline was pounding, telling me to do something, but there was nothing else to do. I ended up staying in that lot until evening. Couldn't bring myself to go home. I dozed off for a bit, woke up with a stiff neck and a headache. Ate a stale donut from a convenience store and washed it down with cold coffee. Kept thinking about Tom's face. The way he stared at me, like he was analyzing a defective product. The memory of her on her knees made me feel sick, but in a distant, almost unreal way. I wasn't sure how to process it all. I remember looking at the passenger seat, seeing the receipts, an old newspaper, and an empty water bottle. I realized I didn't have any plan. I just knew I couldn't go back to that house. Not yet. That night, I found a quiet cul-de-sac on the far side of town. Parked there, reclined my seat. Listened to my breathing. That was my bed for the night. Cold, cramped, my coat bunched up under my head like a pillow. In the morning, I woke up feeling stiff and worse off with the cold. My nose was clogged and my throat felt raw. The first thought in my head was how I'd broken a mirror that had probably been in the bedroom for years. Had to be replaced. What an absurd thing to focus on. But it stuck, because that's how your mind works sometimes when your life collapses in one instant. You remember small details. You keep replaying them. I didn't call her. Didn't call Tom. My phone buzzed a few times, but I ignored it. I just sat in the driver's seat, thinking about how to move forward. People talk about heartbreak, betrayal, all that stuff, but you don't really feel it the way they make it sound in movies. It's more like your chest is hollowed out, and you don't know whether to cry, scream, or just shut down. I shut down. I didn't cry once. Just stared at the dashboard until my eyes burned. At some point, I started the truck and drove to a diner on the highway. Ate scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard. The waitress asked if I was okay. I probably looked like hell. I just nodded, told her I was fine. Paid in cash and left too big a tip, because I couldn't handle more questions. The day crawled by. I drove around aimlessly, then found another spot to park for the night, a Walmart lot. That's where I ended up staying a second night. My phone kept buzzing. Sometimes it was my wife's number, sometimes unknown numbers. I turned it off altogether. I needed quiet. I needed to float in this nothingness because the alternative felt too painful. Third morning, I was sore all over. Tired, unwashed, reeking of stale sweat. My face in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger's. Bloodshot eyes, scruffy beard. I asked myself a question, now what? Couldn't live in the truck forever. Couldn't pretend none of this happened. And that's when I decided I needed to see the office again, but not to talk to Tom. I had a sinking feeling something else had been going on there, beyond the affair, some other dark corners I'd ignored. Part of me wanted to see if I could hurt him in a way that cut deeper than a busted watch. So I waited until I knew most of the staff would be out at a presentation. It was scheduled for that afternoon, some marketing pitch downtown. I still had my key card for the building. I parked near the back, walked in, swiped my card, no problem. The security guard recognized me, gave me a nod. I said I forgot something at my desk. The guy didn't suspect a thing. My desk was a small cubicle in a corner. Tom's big office was on the other side, a glass-walled setup that overlooked the open floor. His door was locked, but I didn't need his office. I needed the server room. The IT folks had an open network system where all the project files were stored, plus old email backups. I'd overheard them talk about how easy it was to retrieve old data if you had the right clearance. Tom had never bothered revoking my access. Why would he? He probably thought I was some broken man licking his wounds, too afraid to do anything. Or maybe he just hadn't had time to think it through. I sat down at my computer, typed in my credentials. Sure enough, everything was still active. I dug through the shared folders, found archived emails, reports, financial statements. My chest tightened when I realized how extensive it was. I recognized certain spreadsheets that never saw the light of day. Over time, I'd heard rumors, side comments from Tom about covering tracks, but I was busy with my own tasks. Now it was all in front of me. Fake invoices, suspicious transactions, side deals. My head pounded, but I kept going, copying everything onto a thumb drive. It took a while, because I wanted it all. Even the old backups from a year ago. Especially those. Some files had notes about potential bribes, manipulated accounts. The magnitude of it was bigger than I'd guessed. I kept an eye on the clock. I didn't know how long the presentation would last, but it wouldn't be forever. My hands shook as I clicked through folder after folder. My body felt clammy, sweat soaking the back of my shirt. The more I saw, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about him sleeping with my wife. This was about him stepping on anyone in his path. A man with no conscience, no boundaries. My breathing got heavy, but I forced myself to keep it together. I downloaded everything to the thumb drive, then also uploaded it to a personal Dropbox. That took another chunk of time. After what felt like hours, I ejected the drive, closed everything down, cleared my traces as best I could. Then I put the drive in my pocket and stared at the screen. My reflection on the dark monitor made me think of that shattered mirror. I whispered to myself, "I'm done here." And I stood up. As I walked out, I noticed my nameplate on the cubicle. I pulled it off, stuck it in my back pocket. I wasn't coming back. I passed by the security guard. He asked if I found what I needed. I said, "Yeah, I did. Thanks, man." I left, got back to my truck, sat behind the wheel, and let out a long breath. My phone was still off. I turned it on, just long enough to send an email with the Dropbox link to a few addresses. People I trusted a little. People who might know what to do with it if I couldn't. Then I turned the phone off again. That was that. I drove out of the lot and realized I had no place to go. I wasn't ready to face my wife. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. So I just drove, passing the same streets I'd known for years, the same gas stations and fast food joints. But now it all felt strange. Like a city I'd never seen before. I was on my own, with a flash drive full of dirty secrets, and a memory of my wife with another man. My throat ached. I coughed, wiped my nose, and thought, this is my life now. I just keep going. I don't know where, but I keep going. The next day, I parked in a quiet spot behind a boarded-up store. Didn't sleep much, just drifted in and out. Sometime around noon, I turned my phone on again. Saw a bunch of missed calls and texts from my wife. A few voicemails from Tom, unbelievably. I didn't want to listen. But I did, just one message from him, out of pure curiosity. He sounded controlled, but there was an edge of fear. "We need to talk. Let's be adults here. Don't do anything you'll regret." I deleted it. My wife's messages ranged from frantic apologies to anger, to confusion about where I was. I didn't reply to any of them. In the end, I texted her brother. Just said, "I'm alive." Didn't say another word. He texted back immediately, asking if I was safe, if I needed anything. I ignored that too. I couldn't handle talking to him, not after what I'd seen, not after everything. That evening, I tried to think rationally about next steps. I had some cash in the bank, but not enough to last forever. My job? Gone. My marriage? Probably gone too. I could stay in a motel for a few nights, but I couldn't bear the idea of 4 walls and a bed that wasn't mine. The truck felt like the only space that belonged to me, ironically. Then I remembered the house up north. My grandfather's place, left to me when he passed. It sat mostly empty, an old cabin near a quiet town. I hadn't visited in years. My wife never liked it. Too cold, too remote. But it was mine. So I started driving north on the interstate. The first few hours were a blur of neon signs and headlights. By the time I got to the rural roads, it was late. I found a rest stop, leaned my seat back, and tried to shut my mind off. Images kept jumping back at me, Tom's smirk, the flicker of panic in my wife's eyes, my own reflection in that shattered mirror. I felt the crack inside me, the sense that my old life had ended. There was no going back. I made it to the cabin the next morning. It was smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling on the porch, the yard overgrown. Inside was dusty but otherwise untouched. Some old furniture, an old wood stove. I opened a few windows to air it out, coughed a bit from the dust. There was no internet, barely any cell signal. That was fine by me. I brought in a couple bags from the truck, rummaged for blankets, set them on the rickety couch. I felt exhausted, physically and mentally. That first day, I just sat there, staring at the dust motes in the sunlight. No TV, no radio. Just quiet. At some point, I drifted off to sleep, my head propped against the arm of the couch. When I woke up, it was dark outside. Next morning, I decided to at least get some groceries. Drove 15 miles to the nearest town, grabbed canned food, bread, coffee, water. Stood in line at the small store, noticing how people here took their time talking to the cashier, like they all knew each other. I realized I must look like an out-of-towner. Probably smelled like one too. I paid, loaded up the truck, and headed back to the cabin. On the way, I started thinking about the flash drive in my pocket and the Dropbox link I'd sent out. I knew the files were out there now. But part of me felt unsatisfied, like I hadn't done enough. Tom was a big figure in the company, in the community. He had connections. He could try to bury things if I didn't make them public enough. Then again, maybe I didn't care. Maybe I just wanted to ruin him enough that he'd feel the ground shake, the way I had. Anger flared up inside me. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Back in the cabin, I found an old laptop my grandfather used. It was slow, but it still turned on. No Wi-Fi, but I had a cell signal that let me tether occasionally. I plugged in the flash drive and started sorting through the documents. That's when I realized I'd barely scratched the surface of what I'd grabbed. Tons of emails, financial data, client deals, side chat logs. I didn't understand all of it, but some parts were clear enough: false reporting, hush money, an entire labyrinth of corruption. And Tom's name was everywhere. He was at the center. Reading it made me feel sick. This was the man who wore fancy suits and had that polished grin. The man who gave motivational speeches at company retreats about ethics and teamwork. And he'd been lying to everyone. By the time I was done skimming, it was late afternoon. My eyes hurt, my back was stiff. I stepped outside to breathe. The air was cold, pine-scented, crisp. It reminded me of childhood summers with my grandpa. We'd fish in the nearby lake, chop wood, watch old movies on a black and white TV. I missed those times when I felt I knew what life was about. Right now, I felt like a husk of a person, drifting. But at least I had this place. It felt separate from the world that had just cracked open under my feet. A few days passed like that. I tinkered around, cleaning the cabin, reading more files, pacing around the living room with all this restless energy. Sometimes I'd catch myself imagining the look on Tom's face if he realized what I had. Then I'd remember him standing over my wife, his hands on her neck, her hair. It was like a hot blade in my chest. I'd shut down the laptop and walk outside into the cold to clear my head. Couldn't keep that image away. It clung to me, haunting me at random moments. Eventually, the phone started buzzing again. I had just enough signal in certain spots. My wife's brother called once, left a voicemail. It was short. "She's worried. And I got things to tell you. Call me." I ignored him a few more days. But curiosity ate at me. We'd always gotten along in a casual way. He used to invite me for a beer sometimes, talk about sports or whatever. Now his voice sounded tense. One cold morning, I gave in and called him back. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" he asked. I said, "Doesn't matter." There was a long pause. Then he told me he'd been to my house, seen my wife. He said, "Look, I don't want to upset you more, but there's stuff you need to know." Another pause. I heard him take a breath, like he was bracing himself. "She and Tom have been together for half a year. Her father knew. He told her it was just a phase, said, "A man's got needs. Don't worry your husband about it, he's too simple to understand." I listened in silence, my teeth clenched. Then he dropped another bomb. "Your son knew, too. I guess he overheard something. He never told you because he was scared or, I don't know. I'm just telling you everything." My throat felt like sandpaper. "They were all laughing behind your back," he said. "I'm sorry." I couldn't speak. My ears rang. The idea that her father, a man I respected, would shrug off her affair like it was normal, that they'd basically consider me a joke, it felt like a final blow. I just hung up the phone. Didn't say goodbye or anything. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't draw a full breath. I stepped outside, the wind biting my face. I walked to the edge of the property, near the tall pines, and doubled over, feeling close to vomiting. The betrayal wasn't just her and Tom. It was bigger. Deeper. Even my own kid had known. I couldn't process it. I don't know how long I stood there, hunched over, tears burning in my eyes that I refused to let out. Finally, I trudged back inside. Grabbed a beer from the fridge, the kind I'd bought in town, cracked it open. It was cold enough to sting my throat. I drank half of it in one go, set it on the table, and stared at the laptop again. The files were still open on the screen. A quiet rage built in me. Tom, my wife, her father, all of them. They'd laughed behind my back for months. A year, maybe. And for what? Because I was some naive idiot who believed in honesty, in loyalty? It lit a fuse in me. I scrolled through more emails, more financial statements, letting the anger guide my eyes. I recognized names of outside investors, suspicious references to special audits. My mind clicked. I could burn Tom's entire world down if I wanted. But I had to do it right, had to be sure. I was no criminal mastermind. I was just a middle-aged guy who spent a lifetime playing by the rules. Now the rules didn't matter. Later that night, I tried to sleep on the couch. Kept tossing and turning, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold. I stared at the dark ceiling, thinking about everything my brother-in-law told me. It felt like they'd gutted me, left me hollow. I couldn't fight them all. Couldn't fix the betrayal. Couldn't get my wife back in any honest way. The only thing I could do was use what I had on Tom. Make him pay, not just for the affair but for being a rotten piece of garbage who thought he could step on people's lives. That was the moment a single, clear thought cut through the haze. I'm going to finish this. And when it's done, I'll be gone. No goodbyes, no grand speech. Just gone. Because there was nothing left for me in that old life. I woke up the next morning to the sound of wind rattling the windows. I looked outside, saw the sun barely peeking through the tall trees. My throat felt like sandpaper. I heated water on the stove, made instant coffee in an old mug. While it was cooling, I sat at the table and turned on the laptop. I had to see it through. The last part of those files was a series of emails labeled Confidential, Investor Relations. I opened them. They mentioned overseas accounts, Chinese investors, references to ensuring favorable audits. I scrolled further and saw Tom's name CC'd on multiple threads, plus a few other execs. Words like expedite funds and compliance adjustments jumped out at me. I wasn't an expert, but I knew enough to see it was shady. Bribery. They were paying off auditors to rubber stamp their numbers, cover up debts, inflate value for the shareholders. It was all spelled out in black and white. I rubbed my eyes, read it again. The magnitude of it felt larger than anything I'd known about the company. This was huge. Potentially criminal on a federal level. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining the headlines. A big corporation, major fraud, Chinese money, hush deals, the SEC stepping in. This was no small potatoes. This could destroy Tom. Destroy everyone involved, maybe even innocent employees. But I was past caring about that. I had no illusions left. The company was rotten at the core. And Tom deserved to see everything crumble. So I started saving those emails separately, labeled them China. I zipped them up, put them in a folder on the flash drive. Then I sat there, wondering how best to blow the whistle. I could contact the SEC directly, but would they ignore an anonymous tip? Maybe. Then again, these documents were explicit. They couldn't just brush it off. I also thought about sending them to the media. But big outlets might bury it under legal pressure. That's when it occurred to me I should send them to multiple places. Create a chain reaction. Let the story get out of control so Tom and his cronies couldn't contain it. By midday, I'd drafted emails to 3 regional SEC offices. I typed them out carefully, attaching the files and adding a short statement. I am a former employee with evidence of illegal practices. This is genuine. Please investigate. I didn't sign my name. I used a new email address I'd created on the spot. Then, for good measure, I sent the same info to a few news outlets, smaller ones, local, the kind that crave a big story. I pressed send on all of them. My heart hammered like I was jumping off a cliff without a parachute. The second it was done, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Like the adrenaline that had been fueling me had just drained out. I stared at the screen, half expecting the cops or the FBI to bust down my door right then. But of course, nothing happened. The wind outside kept blowing. The old cabin creaked. My coffee had gone cold. That was all. I shut the laptop. Walked outside to the porch, took a deep breath of icy air. The mountains in the distance looked dark under the afternoon sky. I couldn't see a single neighbor. It was just me, alone, in this old place that smelled like my childhood. I felt a glimmer of, what was it, relief? Maybe. Or emptiness. It's hard to tell them apart sometimes. But I knew I'd done what I set out to do. I'd hammered the final nail into Tom Warren's coffin. The next few weeks were a limbo. I stayed in the cabin, going into town only for supplies. No calls, no texts. I left my phone off most days. One morning, I decided to check the news at the local library, where they had public computers. Sure enough, there it was. The company was in trouble. Headlines talked about an SEC probe, allegations of fraudulent reporting, possible bribery. I read every article I could find, scanning for Tom's name. I saw references to senior executives, top management, but nothing conclusive yet. I went back to the cabin, feeling a surge of vindication. They had to face it now. A few days later, the real bombshell dropped. A big national outlet picked it up, referencing leaked documents from an anonymous source, my documents. They talked about overseas investors, suspicious wire transfers. And Tom Warren's name was spelled out. He was being investigated. Some of the smaller investors were already filing lawsuits. The share price plummeted. Like dominoes, the entire structure was collapsing. I sat on my porch, reading an online article on my phone, my hands shaking. I knew I should feel triumphant. But mostly, I just felt numb. One day, about a month into this quiet life, the phone rang. I answered without checking who it was. It was my wife. Her voice was shaky. She said she'd been trying to find me. Asked where I was. I didn't respond. She went on. I lost my job. Silence. They said they had to let me go because of all this. No one wants to keep the wife of a man who did what you did. She paused, waiting for me to say something. I stayed silent. She added, everything's falling apart. My father's furious, Tom's in legal trouble, and... She broke off, sobbing. I closed my eyes, pressed the phone to my ear, feeling an ache in my chest. She said, please, just tell me why you did this. In this small, desperate voice. I took a breath. You know why, I said quietly. You and Tom. All of you. I did what I had to. She kept crying, tried to speak, but the words were jumbled. I couldn't deal with it. I hung up, turned off the phone, and set it aside. I sat there at the table, staring at the wall. I felt no satisfaction in her tears. Instead, I felt a hollow sorrow. We'd been married years. Shared a life, a child. Now it was broken beyond repair. Over the next week, I heard from my brother-in-law in another voicemail, telling me that my son was worried. That she was packing up, maybe planning to move to her parents' place. I didn't respond. I just let it all go. Part of me ached for my son, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out. He'd known about the affair. He'd kept quiet. I couldn't wrap my mind around that. I thought about him as a little boy, how he'd tag along with me, how he'd look up to me. Now I didn't even know who he was. I spent my days clearing out the cabin, fixing a broken step on the porch, patching leaks in the roof. Physical labor, anything to keep my mind off the storm I'd unleashed. Occasionally I'd check the news. Every time, it was more lawsuits, more allegations, more chaos. The stock price was practically worthless. Employees were being laid off in droves. Tom Warren was indicted on charges of fraud and conspiracy. I saw his mugshot on a news website. The next morning, I found I couldn't eat breakfast. I stared at my plate of eggs until they went cold. Weeks turned to a month. The house down south must have been half empty, or maybe sold by now. I didn't know. My wife never tried to come up here. Or if she did, she didn't find me. The cabin was out of the way, and I rarely left. The only person who might know where I was, maybe, was her brother. But he stopped calling after a while. There was nothing left to say. Life was disintegrating for them all, and I was on the outside, watching from the woods. One early morning, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, breathing in the cold air. The sun was coming up, turning the sky pale orange. For a split second, I thought of her, my wife, of how we used to drink coffee together on our backyard patio. We joke about daily stuff, about neighbors, about what show to watch later. Just small talk that felt so normal. And now it was gone. All of it. I felt the ache of missing something that was already dead. I hated her for what she'd done, but part of me still wanted the life we'd had. That contradiction twisted in my gut. I finished my coffee, set the mug down, then went inside to gather the last of the documents. I packed up the laptop, the flash drive, put them in a closet. I didn't want to stare at them anymore. The final blow had already been dealt. Tom Warren's empire was crumbling, the company in ruin, my wife's career destroyed. I'd gotten what I wanted, or at least what I thought I wanted. But it didn't fix me. It didn't bring me peace. I still woke up in a cold sweat sometimes, thinking about that moment in the bedroom. Or about the quiet conspiracy of silence that my son and her father had kept for so long. I'd never trust anyone the same way again. Another week passed before I decided to get in the truck and just drive. No real goal, just the urge to move. I threw some clothes into a duffel bag, locked up the cabin, and set off. The roads were empty, the air crisp. It felt like the start of a long journey I hadn't planned. And maybe it was. I turned on the radio, static mostly, then some country station fading in and out. I listened to it quietly, letting the hum of the engine fill my chest. Mile after mile, I thought about the last few months. The betrayal, the revenge, the quiet meltdown of everything I once knew. Sometimes I'd stop at a gas station, grab coffee, maybe a sandwich, then keep going. I wasn't sure if I was heading east or west. Just followed the roads that looked interesting. Slept in the truck some nights, other nights in cheap motels when I couldn't stand the cramped cab. I'd stare at the stained walls, the flickering neon outside the window, and wonder how it all came to this. But I never got a clear answer. Life doesn't give you neat explanations. I found myself pulling over at random spots just to watch the scenery, fields, mountains, rivers. Trying to feel something like peace. Sometimes I did, briefly. But mostly there was this dull ache in my chest, a sense of drifting that wouldn't leave me. The nights were hardest. I'd lie awake, thinking about her. Not the affair part, but the old memories. The day we got married, the day our son was born. The mundane routines we'd shared. I'd wonder, was she happy before Tom? Did I miss some sign of her unhappiness? Then I'd remember that smug look on Tom's face, and the anger would flare up all over again. After about a month on the road, I heard the official news. The company had gone under completely. People were out of jobs, the board was dissolved, lawsuits flying in every direction. Tom was negotiating a plea or something like that. It was all rumors on the internet. But the consensus was clear: they were finished. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction. Another part felt guilty for the employees who just lost their livelihoods. I never wanted to hurt them. But I wanted to hurt him, and that's what happened. One day, I checked my email in a public library. Found a message from a reporter, someone who tracked me down through a mutual connection at the company. They said they knew I was the whistleblower. Wanted an exclusive interview. I didn't respond. I wasn't looking to be a hero or a media figure. I wanted to vanish. So I closed the email and moved on. Sometimes I'd think about calling my son. But every time, my hand would freeze over the phone. I just couldn't do it. He'd lied, or at least hidden the truth. Maybe he was confused, maybe he was scared. But I couldn't see past the betrayal. I told myself I was done with all of them. And I was. Even though it hurt. Especially because it hurt. In some small town, I booked a room above a bar for a few nights, tried to find odd jobs just to keep my hands busy. Didn't stay long. Moved on to the next place. That was my pattern for a while. I'd wake up, feel restless, pack up, leave. No destination in mind. I wasn't running away from anything specific. I just couldn't stand still. My mind kept replaying everything, and I needed constant motion to blur the edges of those memories. Then one morning, I woke up in a roadside motel, stared at the ceiling, and realized I was tired. Tired of drifting, tired of feeling that open wound in my chest. Tired of replaying the same scenes in my head. But I had nowhere to go, no real plan. The cabin was always there, but it felt like a tomb now, filled with the ghosts of what I'd done. Going back to the house, our old home, wasn't an option. That world was gone. I found myself missing normalcy. A routine, a job, a reason to get up in the morning. But I didn't trust myself to just walk into a new life and pretend I wasn't broken. The betrayal had carved something out of me that I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I recalled some line from a conversation with a friend years ago. After certain things happen, you don't bounce back, you just change shape. I guess that was me now. Changed shape, missing pieces? One evening, I stopped at a small lake to watch the sun set. Sat on a bench, smoking a cigarette I'd bummed off a local fisherman. The water was smooth, reflecting the orange sky. For a moment, I felt a wave of longing, for the life I had before I knew about the affair, before I discovered Tom's corruption, before I lost faith in my own family. I wished I could turn back time and remain ignorant. But ignorance isn't an option once you've seen the truth. Eventually, I flicked the cigarette away, sighed, and got back in the truck. Kept driving. That was how I spent those weeks, drifting from one lonely horizon to the next. Maybe it was penance, maybe it was just aimlessness. Hard to say. But I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. Winter was coming, and these roads would get icy. Sleeping in the truck would become brutal. I circled back toward the general direction of the cabin. Stopped off in a bigger town to get supplies, mostly dried goods. Considered picking up a second-hand generator for electricity, but it was pricey. Ended up just buying a few more blankets, a portable heater that could run off small propane tanks. Drove the last stretch to the cabin, pulling in late at night. The place looked the same, dark, silent, a faint smell of pine in the air. I left my headlights on, carried my stuff inside. It felt weirdly comforting, like coming home after a long trip. I turned off the headlights, lit a lantern, and stood there in the musty living room. I thought about the next day, and the next. I had no illusions that I'd build a new life here. But at least I could breathe without feeling eyes on me. That night, I lay awake on the couch, listening to the wind outside. My mind drifted to her again, how she'd sounded on the phone, crying about losing her job, about everything going to hell. I wondered if she regretted it all. Or if she was just sorry she got caught up in Tom's downfall. Then I realized something. It didn't matter. Nothing would make it right again. That final barrier had been crossed. I dozed off near dawn, dreamt about the day I saw them. In my dream, Tom turned to me and said, "Close the door." But his voice sounded like my wife's father. And my wife was laughing, a low, mocking laugh I'd never heard before. I jolted awake, my heart pounding, sweat cooling on my skin. Outside, the sky was gray, a hint of morning creeping in. I sat up, rubbed my eyes. Took a few deep breaths. It was over. The story was written. But the ending still haunted me. A few weeks later, I found myself in a sort of numb routine at the cabin. I'd wake up, make a simple breakfast, maybe chop some wood if the weather allowed. I'd read old books my grandfather left behind, westerns, war memoirs, dog-eared science fiction paperbacks. My phone stayed off most of the time. Occasionally, I'd turn it on to check for messages, more out of habit than any real hope. I didn't want to speak to anyone, but some part of me couldn't fully let go. There were missed calls, the occasional text. One from my son, just a single line. "Dad, can we talk?" I never answered. Maybe one day, but not now. Sleep was tough. Most nights, I tossed and turned, or got up to pace around. I'd stare at the walls, thinking about the year that led to this, the cracks in my marriage, the blind spots I must have ignored. I wasn't a perfect husband, but I never thought we'd end up here. And Tom Warren? He was just a man I worked for, never liked but tolerated because that's what you do in life. Then everything changed in one afternoon. I'd undone his entire career, maybe his entire future. I'd effectively undone my own future too. One afternoon, I walked through the cabin, looking at old pictures and knickknacks. Found a photo of my wife and me from years back. We were young, smiling at the camera, wearing matching t-shirts at some amusement park. I felt a lump in my throat. I set the photo face down in a drawer. Couldn't look at it. Went outside to chop wood until my arms ached, trying to sweat the memories out. Time blurred. Days slipped into each other. The only real contact I had was with a local hardware store owner, where I'd pick up supplies now and then. He'd ask how the cabin was holding up. I'd shrug, say, "Good enough," or something equally short. He'd nod and ring me up. That was it. One evening, I found myself missing my wife like an idiot. Missing the version of her I thought I knew. Missing the routine of having someone next to me in bed. I hated myself for that. I felt like a fool for still longing for her touch. But the memories persisted. Love doesn't just disappear because you learn a terrible truth. It tears you apart, piece by piece. In the quiet of the cabin, I felt every cut. Sometimes, though, that image of Tom's hands on her neck would flash in my mind, and any softness I felt would vanish. I'd realize all over again why I did what I did. I wasn't trying to be a hero or moral crusader. I was just a man who got pushed too far, who found an opening to strike back. And I did it. Maybe I went too far. Maybe not. But it was done. That's what I told myself on the nights when guilt or second thoughts crept in. Eventually, news filtered through, the indictments were finalized. Tom was facing charges that could land him in prison for years. The company was bankrupt. The board members were scapegoating each other, legal battles erupting all over. My wife's father had apparently distanced himself publicly, as if that would fix anything. Some rumor said my wife was staying at a friend's place, trying to rebuild her life. I shut the phone off every time I got the slightest whiff of the latest gossip. I didn't need the details. I already knew how the story ended. Then one chilly morning, I sat with a cup of coffee and realized I felt empty, but not in pain. Just this flat, gray emptiness. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't in agony either. It was like a scab forming over a wound. You're still aware it's there, but it doesn't bleed every time you touch it. I took a slow sip, thinking about how life might look if I ever moved on. Maybe I'd get a small job in a nearby town, maybe I'd just live quietly off my savings for a while. Maybe I'd sell the cabin eventually. I didn't know. The future was a black void, but at least it was my void. That afternoon, I grabbed the truck keys, drove out to a lookout point where you can see the valley below. Stood there with my jacket zipped up, the wind cutting across my face. I thought about how, in some twisted way, I'd survived. The old me had died, sure, but I was still breathing, still able to stand here and stare at the horizon. That had to count for something. I looked at the phone in my hand. Toyed with the idea of calling my son, telling him I missed him. But the anger spiked again. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat instead. Not today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe never. Hard to say. I took one last long look at the valley, watched the clouds drift. There was a raw beauty in the emptiness of that sky, in the sense that everything we build can collapse overnight. I felt small under that wide expanse, but not powerless. I'd made my choices. Now I was living with them. I drove back to the cabin as the sun dipped low. The sky turned pink and gold, and for a moment, it was enough just to watch it. When I reached the porch, I realized I was hungry, so I rummaged for something to cook. Ended up making a can of soup and some toasted bread on the wood stove. Ate standing up, because I couldn't be bothered to sit. Life was that simple now. Do what you have to do, move on. When darkness fell, I lit a small lantern, read a dog-eared Western novel until my eyes were heavy. I tried not to think about tomorrow. Tried not to think about the past. That's the only way I could sleep anymore, by existing in a narrow space between yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's unknowns. I woke up sometime after midnight, the lantern still flickering. The wind had died down, and it was quiet. I stood, stretched, and decided to step outside. The moon was high, the pine trees casting long shadows. The silence felt thick. I looked up at that moon and thought, is this it? Is this who I am now? A man alone in the woods, carrying the weight of betrayal, wrapped in the aftermath of his own revenge. And in that stillness, I realized I'd do the same thing again if I had to. Not out of pride, not out of hatred, but because it was the only way I could keep living. If I'd swallowed it all, let Tom keep doing what he was doing, let her keep making a fool of me, I would have rotted from the inside. I'd have died in my own skin. So I did what I had to do to survive. I looked at the moon a minute longer, took a deep breath, and went back inside. In the weeks to come, I kept mostly to myself, tinkering around the property, reading. Some nights I'd think about trying to trust another woman someday, but the thought made me uneasy. I doubted I ever could. My heart felt locked behind a door that might never open again. And that was okay, in its own sad way. Sometimes, when the memory of her face pulled at me, I'd remind myself how she looked that afternoon with Tom. That final, awful image would close the door on nostalgia. I'd feel that bitterness rise up, a sadness that had no place to go. But then it would ebb, leaving me in a quiet numbness that felt better than raw pain. One night, I dreamed of her lying next to me, whispering my name. I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but no sobs, no sound. Just a damp pillow in the darkness. I wiped my face, exhaled, and stared into the shadows. I thought, I'm still here. That's all. Still here. When morning came, I pulled on my boots, stepped outside. The air was cold and clean. I felt my lungs expand, felt my feet on the solid ground. I remembered the day I walked out of that bedroom, golf club in hand, leaving them both gaping like scared kids. I thought about the months since. All that damage, all that ruin, and me, drifting in its wake. But I was breathing, alive, not finished yet. And maybe that was enough. I did what I had to do, not for glory, not even to get even, really, just to keep myself from dying inside. Sometimes, that's the only reason a man needs. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the sun peek through the trees. For a moment, I felt a kind of stillness in my chest. Not peace, but something close. And that was the closest I'd gotten to okay in a long time. I'd take it.